Greetings and welcome to another episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. I'm your host, Scott, and of course, with me, as always, is my sidekick, Caleb. Caleb, how you doing this evening?
I am doing good. It's been a heck of a weekend, but I'm doing good.
Yep, we made it. It's Sunday night tonight, and we both made it through a long weekend. Today, we, of course, are back to talk about the experience growing up as youth group kids in the 90s and how that has shaped our adult lives. We'll talk to old friends about their faith journeys spanning from the 90s to today and discuss current cultural topics through the lens of someone who grew up during that era. Caleb, this is a fun one. We have a two-parter coming up. Who is our guest for the next two episodes?
Yeah, so we're joined by Troy and Meleah, who were 90s youth group kids as well, but then and didn't go to our youth group. But this is kind of another episode of somebody who has a connection to 90s youth group culture and to Five Oaks, but in a different way than us.
Yeah, they came like early 2000s and started doing their own thing, kind of college age-ish, having that experience as youth group kids in the 90s in different parts of the state. So You'll hear about Troy's experience in Western Wisconsin, a little bit more small town. You'll hear about Meleah's experience in the metro suburbs and, how those differed and what it meant for both of them. But I was in Troy and Meleah's small group. They were small group leaders for me and my wife for probably 4 or 5 years before we moved out of the cities for a little while. So, and then beyond that, I know I played basketball with Troy. You'll hear the connections that we had as, kind of young adults as well, post-college. So I've been close with Troy and Meleah for a while, and they're great, and that comes through in the episode. They have a really good dynamic.
And it was really interesting to see, again, a similar experience to the 90s, but just those variations. Like, it just kind of continues to build that there's some of these similarities in certain aspects, but then that variation, which again just adds to the dynamic of 90s youth group, and why when we do the pitch to we want to talk to more people, this is why, because we continue to get this nice prism of ways of looking at 90s youth group and kind of the experience that not only we had but others had. And I thought that was really a nice dynamic that they brought to the show.
Yeah, they had similar experiences, right? Troy definitely did Carmen sketches, human videos. And as we were just talking about before, it's come up in a few episodes now, and it'll come up in future episodes with future guests coming up. But I was the same way. I went into young adulthood, college, post-college, super certain.
Yep.
And very, very confident of the things that I believed. And that's changed a lot. Yep. And Troy spells that out, Troy in particular, but Troy spells that out very clearly about his experience. And it was a refreshing take on a similar topic that many people that we've talked to have gone through.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, we really appreciate everybody listening. Troy and Meleah, thank you very, very much, of course, for joining us. We appreciate that. And we hope you enjoy the episode. As a reminder, there are two parts to this one. Part 2 will come out next week. So please make sure that you listen to both. Thanks for listening.
I want to break in and quickly remind everyone that the views and opinions expressed on this episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s may not be held by or even approved of by everyone appearing on this episode. One of the goals of this show is to give everyone a safe space to share their opinions and thoughts on deeply personal matters of faith. We are not looking to start an argument, but instead we want to let people share how they feel. During our interviews and discussions, we may not represent every point of view on a given subject, and we understand that this may be frustrating at times, but it is the nature of a podcast discussion with a limited amount of time. We also know and want to acknowledge that our memories of events that happened 25 to 30 years ago may not be 100% accurate. We assume everyone's best intentions as they share how they remember the experience of their youth. Now, back to the show.
Troy and Meleah, it's really good to see you guys. How are you? It's been too long.
We're doing pretty well.
Great. Well, I really appreciate you joining us. You reached out after listening to a few episodes, and man, we did a lot of life together, like post college and stuff. We were in a small group for what 3 or 4 years together before we moved, something like that. And we did a lot of stuff together, and at a pretty important time. We were, a lot of you guys were having kids and stuff at the time, so it's really good to finally talk to you guys again. Tell us just in general, kind of summarize. You were youth group kids like us in the '90s, although spoiler alert, you didn't go to Five Oaks immediately in high school and came a little bit later. We'll get to that soon. But just describe your youth group experience growing up in the '90s.
Well, mine was going to be is quite different because I grew up in rural Wisconsin. So that's a difference right there. And I also went to a what they called non-denominational Pentecostal church. So we it was very different than what we experienced at Five Oaks when we got there. And it's been interesting as we've been listening to some of the episodes of the podcast to compare what stuff was similar and what stuff was very different just because of the context we were in. So we did have many of the same, I think you called it a program almost,
Oh yeah.
We definitely did Chubby Bunny and we definitely did Carmen plays at school, at church. So we had all that sort of thing. But we also were in rural Wisconsin. So some of the less smart things that we did included paintball wars, where people would wear their biking shorts, which is not recommended. We had some people that literally got welts and lasting scars from some of those things. And we enjoyed the occasional cookout of forest meats, I guess you'd call them, that sort of thing. One of my favorite stories is we had a walkathon around our Shell Lake as a fundraiser. And my friend Josh and I started out running because we were 16, why not? We started out running, and another girl, an older girl in the youth group, started out running with us. And we weren't going to stop before she stopped, and she wasn't going to stop before we stopped. So we got to run the whole 10 miles around the lake when we were not planning on doing that at all. But we were young and stupid, so it was fine.
Made it. Well, good. When you say Pentecostal, was it like shofars and speaking in tongues, or was it not quite that?
It was definitely speaking in tongues. Later on, when
Flags.
she visited, we had people dancing in the aisles with flags. It was the experience. I mean, we'll get into it, but it was a very formative experience. It was very important. I wouldn't have traded it for the world. It was not the type of environment that fit me very well. I'm not a very, what would you say? I'm not a dance in the aisles kind of person. That's not my personality.
No
Charismatic.
streamers and ribbons in your hands.
No, but the people, the youth leaders that gave their time and effort and lives for us, and the group of friends that we had. One of the other things that separates my wife and I is that she went to a Christian school growing up, and I went to a public school. And so my youth group was my church friends. I didn't have the church friends at school. My youth group was in a different town than my school, so they were about 6 miles away. So there were very few Christian friends at my school, and all of my Christian friends, for the most part, were at my youth group. And so I essentially led two lives in a lot of ways. I had my school life and my school friends, the people that I played sports with, the people that I hung out with after school, that sort of thing. And then I had my youth group friends, where that was probably the majority of my social experiences. And we would plan things and spend time at each other's houses, and probably much the same in the way that you guys did at Five Oaks. That was my primary friend group, and the primary influence growing up.
Meleah, what about you? What was youth group like for you in the '90s?
Well, I would say completely different. I went to a Christian Reformed church, which we'll get into this part later, but
Which is very similar to charismatic, right?
yes, it's on the opposite end of the spectrum. Reformed. Like if you think about what is Christian Reformed look like, you'd think there are no overhead projectors, but there's a very large pipe organ, which is played for all the services. There's no clapping or raised hands in worship. Those are not things that happen there. And it was just very like reformed in theology. Our youth group was called JIPS, Junior Young People Society, which I just love that name. I was like, okay, other people go to youth group, I go to JIPS. And JIPS was great because there was a food fight pretty much every meal that you had at whomever's house was hosting. So different families would host, and the fork and spaghetti noodles would often flick from one side of the table to the other, and lots of giggling and playfulness would ensue. So I even remember doing that at the pastor's house, the parsonage, and church was in Bloomington on France Avenue, and I lived in Lakeville. So there's a little bit of a commute there. You don't just naturally show up in people's neighborhoods or the grocery store, whereas Troy's people, all his church people, were pretty much near and staying put in one place, whereas I moved. Maybe we'll call that traveling for kids, right? I moved multiple times in my life, so that was part of it. And then another piece of it was sort of like youth group phase 2 was through New Life Church of Woodbury. And I was attending New Life School at the time. And so
they do have a school there. Yes, I remember now.
Yeah, there's a school in Woodbury, in youth group there. I don't remember a ton about it, except I do remember we did the Experiencing God study, and wow, that thing is very detailed. The pages are huge. It is lengthy. It is in depth. It's like an 8.5 by 11 size manual of experiencing God. And so you, like in a nutshell, you learn to look for where God is at work and then join. You join in there. So you don't have to create a place for God to be at work. You look for where stuff is already happening and then you get in on that action. So that was a cool piece, but like I said, it was a workbook. And I was very much like a fill in the blanks. If the blanks are there, they're meant to be filled in. And so all of the lines need well thought out, comprehensive answers for some reason. So that was part of it.
What do you mean were? Were a person like that?
Yes, I'm a reflective person.
You are still very much a fill in the blanks person.
That's why Meleah, you and my wife Kate always got along, because you're very similar in that regard. Like, hey, I want to think about the perfect answer for whatever this blank is supposed to mean.
Yeah, it's going to be thought out. It's no impulsive off the cuff answer.
So for the both of you, like, how big were your youth groups? Were they really big? I mean, Troy, I would assume yours was not super huge.
It was not small, especially not for the size of town that we had. I would say 20 to 30.
Oh, that's decent. Meleah, how about yours?
I would say more like 10 to 15. There's not a huge group.
So those food fights weren't like cafeteria food fights.
No, they're like one side of the table to the other.
Gotcha.
Back in Gyps.
Gyps.
Yes.
I feel like there should be an issue of Gyps on the comic book wall behind Caleb.
I was in a society, Troy.
Yeah.
I have Justice Society around here somewhere.
I figured.
That's close enough. JS. Fill in the blanks. Yeah. Well, that's cool. I asked the question about number because, I think and we'll get to this in a minute, but I think by the time you guys got to Five Oaks and were involved with the youth group, it was was expanding very quickly, right? And it's pretty exponential growth there. What are some of the teachings that you learned in youth group in the 90s that are still with you today, or are still important for you today?
I'll go first for this one because back in the Experiencing God era, so this was the New Life Church youth group, to throw some context there. Our teacher, you'd split up into gendered groups. So the guys would study Experiencing God with a man leader, and the women would study it with a women leader. And our teacher talked about how God spoke to her through nature. And that kind of blew my mind a little bit because that wasn't specifically like through the words of the Bible. It was through nature. It was through your everyday natural life experiences. And she talked about the cardinal. And so for her, the cardinal was a sign of God was at work, God was active, God was reassuring her. And so I think as a nature and sciencey person, I grabbed a hold of that and I thought, yeah, it does feel like God speaks to me through the presence of animals and such. And like one day I saw 3 turkeys when I went to go get my spiritual haircut lately, which is another story, but I was reassured. I was like, yeah, God is showing me these 3 turkeys in the middle of Edina. Probably just because there's road construction and it's slow enough traffic for turkeys to go walk around. But it felt reassuring, just the presence of God in nature and animals and delighting in that.
So I have a follow-up question. Spiritual haircut. I just need to make sure we're all on the same page here. Think of a few.
Have you had a spiritual haircut yet, Scott or Caleb?
I don't know because I don't know what it is. So I'm worried that I have not. And maybe I need one.
Okay, so the spiritual haircut came about from a situation that occurred that caused me to think maybe I should get off of the wait list for the haircuts from my stylist. I'm a busy stylist. And so I just put my name on the wait list and then she lets me know when she has an opening. And there's some financial stuff where I was about to tell her, just take me off the wait list. I'm just going to wait until TBD. Who knows when TBD is, but I'm just going to wait. And then I thought about it some more and I thought, actually, maybe God wants me to trust God by getting my haircut, even though my inclination as a human is to just cross myself off, save the money for now. We'll spend it later. We'll get the haircut later. But what I decided was it was okay to go ahead and have this haircut. So I called it the spiritual haircut of grace. And I told my stylist, who is not of the same faith as myself, that she was giving me a spiritual haircut, and we just went eye to eye and we just did sort of like this little bow of folded hands together, and she just looked at me and she's like, I'll just make it the best haircut I can. And she always does, but I explained that. And so I had this interesting moment where I could very casually, very authentically bring up trusting and faith and struggle, and then choosing to trust in the struggle to my hairstylist. Just, I did not have that planned in my head before I saw the turkeys. Like, it was just a moment.
That's really cool. That's really personal and kind of, to me, it sounds like it's, something that, again, has been formative based on some of what you talked about before, the creation stuff. I know for me, I go up to the Boundary Waters every year with my son. Not every year. I've been doing it for 5-6 years. And I go up there and you're just like, whoa, it's unbelievable. It's an unbelievable place to visit. It's an unbelievable place to experience. And a lot of people seek that out because they seek out some sort of higher understanding from creation. Troy, what about you? What are some teachings or memories you have of youth group that are still with you today?
I don't know that I would have specific teachings in mind, but I would say that I had much the same experience, I think, that you guys did from a teaching standpoint, perhaps even a little bit more so being in the, like you guys talked about kind of judging other denominations. We judged you guys even more because
Oh,
we
it's
we
on.
were non-denomination. I'm doing air quotes. Yeah, non-denominational. We were above all of that denomination stuff, which
Uh-huh.
made us an even better denomination. But it was the general feeling or the general teaching, if you distilled all of what you've talked about, over the last 10, 14 episodes of that 90s evangelical youth kid, I was that.
Hmm.
I very much was somebody who was very interested in learning all the things because I wanted to get it right. I was very confident that I was getting it right, and that
Yep.
we were getting it right at our particular denomination, non-denomination. We have one of my favorite cartoons now is where it shows the graph of all the different denominations branching out, and then it says, "And here is where God found us, and we got it right,"
It's
and
my
oh,
favorite as well. It's the
God's
best.
so lucky to have us.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was very much we kind of had that mentality. But at the same time, I'll say that that was kind of the teaching side of things, very, very sola scriptura, very speaking in tongues and listening for God's voice and all that. But the people and the character of the people and the caring of the people at the church and in the youth group and the youth leaders and all of that were far more impactful in that the genuine love of God came through in everything they did and said and everything that they shared with us and everything that they did for us and did with us. There was very much that you could sense God through that, and you felt like you were getting a picture of God through those people that you were interacting with. And that was
Mhm.
probably the most formative, just that sense and not any specific teaching.
Sure. Sure. I think those youth leaders who give their time, make connections, really speak to, I mean, my current experience. I've said on previous episodes, I feel guilty, still haven't done it yet, but still feel guilty about not currently volunteering in the youth group. Part of me is like, oh, I put in my time, whatever, but I really should participate in some way because I dropped my son off, similar to you, Meleah. It's like 20 minutes away for youth group in Minneapolis. And, there are these younger adults, some college age kids, and my son just latches onto them. He thinks they are the coolest. And so their experience of God really comes through the connection piece rather than, here, let me sit down and, go through your Bible page by page. So that I can see that happening still today. So my next question is, like, what do you tell your kids about your youth group experience? Like, what is the things you tell them that you loved or that were crazy? Like, what do you hold dear and you kind of want to compare your experience to theirs now?
I think I mostly just annoy them with my youth group stories than anything else.
What kind of stories?
Well, the one that comes to mind most often or most recently is Salty the Singing Songbook,
Oh my gosh,
which
dude.
is technically probably a little bit before the 90s, although we did as high schoolers reenact Salty plays for the younger kids.
Whoa.
So we as high schoolers were acting out Salty was it the I forget the name of it, but he was climbing up a mountain. And so I'll just start anytime we're doing any sort of exercise that is we're exerting ourselves, I'll or no, if we're going like outdoors, I'll say, we're going camping now, we're on our way, we're gonna climb up the mountain. And then they
Mm-hmm.
start running away. But then also, I think it was with Micah, especially, there was a sing through the Bible, sing Bible verses through the alphabet. I don't know if either of you remember that one, but where they would
Mm-mm.
say A and then they would say a Bible verse that starts with A, B, Bible verse that starts with B. And so I would often do that for Micah. And I even showed him the clip from, you can find it on YouTube, of this play, and he it just bugs the crap out of him. But at the same time, he latched onto Jay, because Jay was Jesus wept, John 11:35, and the girl in our youth group that had that part did it really well. She acted, overacted into that. And so for a long time, when he would go to bed, he would do Bible verses, mostly ones that Meleah would help him with and coach him with, let's say, quote unquote, real Bible verses, that were more impactful and longer. But then I always had to do, quote, my Bible verse, which was Jesus wept, John 11:35.
There you go.
So I've never forgotten the notation for some
Scripture
of the
memory is
Bible
very
verses.
important. Very
Exactly.
important. Yep.
Even though I kind of tell my kids now that you don't really need to know the chapter and verse. That's what Google's for.
Yes. We would have known that in discipleship group when John gave us our little blue cards to remember our verses.
Did you
We
do
wouldn't
sword
know what the
drills?
future is. I did not do sword drills. I found out about sword drills from Rachel Held Evans and her book, and like I was thinking, like, we kind of dodged a bullet on that one, but that would have fit right in.
I didn't know that they were called sword drills. We didn't call them sword drills, I don't think. But I was awesome.
Not to brag, but
I mean,
I was really good at it.
I'm not competitive or anything, but
Right.
did you do sword drills?
Not at youth group. I think maybe at school sometimes. I was pretty fast at finding the order of things and remembering where I'd find things.
This is where we should probably explain what sword drills are.
Well, for the listener, they can Google it.
Yeah.
But no.
There you go.
Yeah, I hadn't heard about them until Rachel Evans told me about them. But yeah, that was definitely a thing. Meleah, what about you? What are some things you share with your kids about your youth group experience?
I think mostly I just have one child in youth group so far, and so mostly I ask him, I kind of drill him on what his youth group experience was that night. Like, okay, now what was the topic? And what did you learn? And what did you do? And I know he's going to shoot hoops a bunch because that's where I would collect him from the gym, reluctantly wanting to put his basketball away and leave the gym. There's always more hoops to do, and he wants to leave at like the last minute. And our son Noah is going to youth group at Five Oaks right now. So that's like another little nugget of, wow, okay, so I was in college age. Do we even call it youth group? College age group with Pastor John. That's where I met you, Scott and Caleb. And Troy. Definitely met Troy there.
Don't forget about him.
This is such a funny story. I met him at your house, Scott, at the college age Christmas dinner.
What?
It was my 21st birthday, and all of my friends had gone home to be with their families because my birthday is close to Christmas.
Okay.
And I had to decide, do I go to this dinner, this church Christmas dinner of the church where my parents are starting to attend, or do I stay home with my parents on my 21st birthday in December? And I thought about it. I was like, I don't know anyone at this church Christmas dinner thing, but Pastor John has invited me a few times. I'm pretty sure Bill Goodall had told me about it a couple times by then, but that's where I met this guy over here, Troy. And that was at your house, Scott. That was at your parents' house.
I'm taking full credit for this marriage. That's
I
totally forgot that.
I've been reminded of this many times because I've been told that apparently I flirted with everyone
except me.
That sounds like selective memory a little bit.
I think so.
It was pretty funny.
Wow. Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. Well, we'll get to Five Oaks in a minute, because I am very interested in kind of how that kind of became part of your life. But just in terms of who you are back in the 90s compared to who you're at now, like, are things completely different? Are things completely the same? Like, is there any journey there, or are you just kind of similar to where you were before?
Are you avoiding asking the 18-year-old, 43-year-old to
Yeah, it's
our
kind of the same
ages since
question.
we're a
I
little
don't know how
older
old
than
you are.
guys?
What did your 18-year-old self tell your
We're not that
49-year-old
much
self?
older than you guys.
That's true.
Yeah, I guess I'll answer first because I think in many ways I'm a polar opposite now. Much just like I was saying, I grew up as kind of that quintessential evangelical kid, and I was my personality is very much one of wanting to be right, wanting to know the answer. I went into computer science half because there was an answer in
Mm-hmm.
computer science. You programmed the code, and then it gave you the thing that you asked it to give you, and it was reproducible and it was certain, and that was very appealing to me. And even through college, I was very much well intentioned, of course, but I was very much a person who was very confident that I had a good understanding and a right understanding of the Bible and what it taught. And to be fair, I did and do know the Bible front to back. I'm very well versed.
Well versed.
Add Caleb, add a rim shot in there. All the
Exactly.
producers. That's just
But I think I made the mistake of many of the people of my youth of growing up in the 90s that you guys have talked about of wanting and believing in that certainty of chasing that answer and wanting to get things right. I remember there was a time in college, and I was a nerd along with being a child of the 90s, so I was one of the first people in our community to be connected to this internet thing back when it was a baby. And I was on things called bulletin boards back then. I don't know if you guys
Mhm.
remember those. But one of my favorite bulletin boards was a group called rec.music.christian, which
Nice.
was a global, kind of like Facebook or Discord these days, but it was a global thing that connected all sorts of fans of Christian music. And as you may have guessed, not all of those fans of Christian music were necessarily believers. They just enjoyed the music. And I remember getting into a discussion, we won't call it an argument, with Jerry B. Ray, I think his name was, and he was pushing back on my certainty and everything in the Bible is as it says it on the page, and that is what you have to follow word for word. And he took the story where Jesus says, if somebody asks you for your tunic, give them your cloak as well. And he said, oh, well, then you know that stereo system that you just bought that you were talking about, because I had just gotten out of, I was just in college or whatever, and this was like a splurge, and I had a very nice stereo system on which to play my Christian music. And he said, I want it. Give it to me. And and I was like, oh, I really struggled with that because according to myself, the interpretation of that scripture was he asked for it. I
Mhm.
have to give it to him. And if I don't, then that invalidates everything. Like the entire Bible is gone if I don't do this. And obviously that was kind of what he was trying to teach me at that point. He
Sure.
didn't make me go through with it, but that I think was a formative point that started to, I don't know if you'd want to say unravel that that part of my Christian belief where I needed to be right. And that's not to say that my desire to share the gospel and to evangelize and all that sort of stuff wasn't out of goodwill and wasn't out of genuine concern. I was very convinced I was right, and that meant that if I didn't convince these other people that I was right and that they were wrong and that they should believe the same way that I do, then they could go to hell, and that's bad. So it was out of a genuine concern for
Mhm.
their well-being, but that was the beginning of the end, I guess, of a long 20-year journey to where I am now, which is, that is to say, much less certain. of
Sure.
myself and my command of what God has for us.
Sure. I mentioned it in another episode, I think, with Alex, but one of the things that did it for me was the book by Peter Enns called The Sin of Certainty. And not everyone likes Peter Enns. He comes off as like this hoity-toity, full of himself guy, which is, he's actually very self-deprecating, but he's very, very smart. And I mean, he's a college master's level professor. And that book, I was like, man, he makes so many good points about, you miss the message, right? And when you focus so much on the what, if every verse is equally weighted in the Bible, we got problems, right? So that really did it for me.
I did before I let my wife talk. I was reading one of his other books, How the Bible Actually Works.
Yep.
When I went to, and our children attend a Wells Lutheran school, and I went to one of the functions where the kids were all playing, and I was just sort of sitting reading my Peter Enns book at this gathering of other Wells Lutheran people. And I did have a couple of people ask, what's that book about?
Yeah. Don't put that cover too far up, Troy. You just gotta hide that a little bit. So, well, as you just said, you can now let your wife speak. This is very complimentarian of you. So, just kidding.
Oh, don't go there yet.
Well, maybe we will. No, but Meleah, what for you? What's changed compared to where you were at, 30 years ago?
Well, to reference my little quiet time spiral bound plastic binding notebooks, I still have a lot of quiet time rhythms. Speaking of which, tomorrow I'm launching a YouVersion Bible plan group with friends. So a little shout out to that continuity, that thread of gonna take some Bible plan time. I did not write the plan. It's not my own. I just invited friends to it.
But you have written a set.
I have written a Bible study that is so far not published.
Not part of YouVersion.
And I led a group of women through it, my pilot study. So that was cool. Back in my women's ministry days.
Nice.
And so it's that thread of involvement has continued. It just has kind of shifted. Like, I taught Sunday school with my now 11th grader yesterday for kids community, as they call it. And so those rhythms of those continuity of consistency, those things have still continued.
Would you have identified as a complementarian in your youth?
Oh man.
Hey, I'm the interviewer here. Back off.
I think he just wants to know, Scott, in a safe place.
I kind of do, yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I'm gonna let Scott be the interviewer.
You know what I answer?
Would you say you were a complimentary back then?
Oh man. Well, I think in the beginning of the Bible, where it says male and female were both made in the likeness of God, I think that doesn't get enough highlights.
Do you think that now? I'm just curious whether that was a journey for you, or whether has that always been a
Conviction for you.
Yeah, like a serious topic for you, or has it been a journey from, because I'm assuming you were taught more complementarianism as a reform, and that's definitely more of Five Oaks. Was that a journey for you, or have you always been this way?
This way. Define this way.
I'll fill in the blank here a little bit, Meleah. I do distinctly remember meeting you for the first time, and maybe not immediately, but came to understand you as someone who took the Bible very seriously, loved it, and will always wanted to be at that time and will always be engaged with it, while also kind of standing up for yourself as a woman and maybe backing away from some of those things. That's other guests we've had. We've talked about some of these issues where we've just kind of understood that Five Oaks, we kind of had it pretty good because they never really from the pulpit stood up and said, like, your marriage must be, the woman must not work or that sort of thing. And I think that's closer to some of our evangelical circles than we think. And this just wasn't part of what Five Oaks did. So that was my early impression of you, if that helps.
I feel like sometimes I experience conflicts enjoying the Bible to the level that I do, and enjoying the study of the Bible to the level that I do, being a female and not quite knowing, well, what do we do with a woman who is passionate about reading her Bible and commentaries and websites and digging deep into, well, now what did that town mean? Or wow, that name of that individual, if we study it and we read about it, like there's 10 different layers that we would miss if we just read the verse.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wrestled with what to do with that piece of my spiritual passion as a woman, and it has run into some roadblocks from time to time, with not everything being accessible to women or welcoming to women to want to engage the scripture at that level, and people
Mm-hmm.
sometimes just not knowing what to do with it. And then me keeping that quiet time more of a private quiet time.
Mm-hmm.
So not always owning the fact that that is a key part of myself,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to keep it on the down low because it's not always acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
Even in Christian spiritual circles, it's not always welcome.
Yeah.
I just wonder if that, women teaching and having some authority in that regard, whether it is for interpretation or writing a Bible study like you talked about before, that sort of thing. I just wonder how much that changes in our kids' lifetime. You can see it here and there in different evangelical churches where they're now some are giving women the platform, not just to be like I'm not gonna be a little cynical here, but for a long time it's like the ceiling was like the children's pastor, right? That's about it. Certainly not on the board, and certainly definitely
not youth pastor, just the children.
Yeah, just the children's pastor.
Yeah,
Yes,
especially
exactly.
not the youth pastor.
Yeah, not the youth pastor, and not on the board, and not on the pulpit. And now you're starting to see that break a little bit. And I think that's threatening to people, because a lot of people have this view of a small amount of verses in the New Testament that women should not be preachers. And I'm not going to comment, right or wrong. We could have a theological discussion maybe on a different episode. We can invite you back for a topical episode. How about that? But I just kind of wonder, by the time our kids are our age, will they look back and be like, why was that a thing?
And maybe that some of this is the passage of time, but I personally experienced this somewhat as coming from the rural youth group and then moving to the cities.
Mm.
Because in rural Wisconsin, we're fairly homogenous. I think we had one black kid in my class.
Mm-hmm.
And we certainly had our share of drug problems and the standard stuff that would happen in a small town, but we didn't have the variety of people that we run into in a big city. So one of the first things I encountered at one of my first jobs, when I got one of my first long-term jobs, is I started talking to somebody, and you introduce yourself, and there was a question about how long have you been married, and I said how long we'd been married at that time, and he said, oh, well, technically you've been married longer than me. And I was like, technically? How does that work? And he said, well, my husband and I have been together for X number of years, but we weren't allowed to get married until whatever. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden now I'm having these interactions with people who lead the lifestyles that I have been told are a certain way. But until I knew that, I already got to know them somewhat as a person. And I already knew that they were not horrible. They were kind and generous and thoughtful and, all that sort of thing. And in fact, this person was I think 8 out of 9 kids. He was the youngest of 9 kids or something like that. And pastor's kid, and the whole family was religious. And so obviously a lot to unpack there, but I was forced basically to reconcile what I'd grown up with and what I'd learned from particular interpretations with what I was seeing and experiencing. And maybe it took a little longer, but I think it was a similar thing with my wife, is that, as a straight white male, like you guys have said, I just don't, it doesn't affect me personally. So I have to experience it through others. And the first time that we were at a church with a woman pastor, how she reacted to seeing someone like her up front speaking the word and being passionate and being well educated and speaking scripture to the people, that really impacted her. And I'm not sure that I really understood what she had been missing before then until then.
I met Jen Wilkin, who is a
Yep.
renowned Bible teacher.
Yep.
I knew I was going to go to one of her conferences a couple years ago, and Troy knew I was going to go there too. And so he's like, you know what? I'm just going to take the kids to the cabin, and you can just go because you're going to go for 2 days, like 2 solid days. Like, you're not going to be around. I'll just go to the cabin. And so I was like, okay, doors open at, say, 5:30. Okay, I'll get there at 5, and we'll see if those doors are actually open or if they're locked. And so I just slipped right in on the first day, sat in the very front row. She comes out with her microphone and does a mic check, and she doesn't say, check 1, check 2. Is this on? She comes out and she shares the Beatitudes. She just starts, blessed are, and I'm sitting in the front row. I was like, I started to cry.
Sure.
And she came over to me and she's like, I don't really know what's going on or whatever, but she's like, can I give you a hug? And so here I am hugging Jen Wilkin, of all people. This is like my Bible hero in the flesh. And I'm crying because it's so beautiful to see a scholarly, educated, spiritual woman speaking with passion and engaging the Holy Spirit in teaching. Seeing that, I just cried, and then I got a hug. So I guess it worked.
That's really cool. I know Jen Wilkin because our church, which is a church that does not allow women on the board and would certainly not put a woman on the pulpit, quotes Jen Wilkin all the time. And I'm thinking to myself, and that's great, right? I want them to have that, read that perspective, but they literally will take her quotes and put them on the screen and read them verbatim. And I'm like, what's the difference? Like, she's the one speaking it. And if we want to get to the spiritual level, God is the one speaking through her. So why does it have to go through a dude at some point? And we'll share quickly is, Meleah, maybe you've done it too, but my wife does BSF, thank you. She does BSF. She's been a BSF leader for many, many years now, 4 or 5 years. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's a woman teaching a group of women, right? Like, there's a large group time. It's essentially a sermon. And I just don't understand what the difference is, In general, I think that community who has the belief that a woman should not speak in that fashion are splitting hairs, but they'll let them do it in some certain capacities where it's safer. So that's a very honest answer, and I very much appreciate you sharing it.
The first trip I took alone was to Texas for a filming of Hebrews that Jen Wilkin did. And I noticed that if I would make eye contact with her when she was reading the Bible, like, sometimes she would cry because she was so passionate about reading the Bible. And I realized that if I made eye contact with her while she was reading the Bible, we were both going to cry. And so I would deliberately look away when she would read the scripture. And then when she would do her teaching, I would turn my eyes back and look at her. But I learned that this is not a good fit for both of us for what we're doing right now.
Not to be recorded.
And it's recorded. We bought the DVD. It's her Hebrews Bible study, and I was on the wait list for that too. So that's like another story. But
Jen Wilkins starts crying, reading the script, and then she says, "Caleb, cut that out."
Wait, did you get a haircut at this conference? I'm confused.
Right? There are limited seats available for this, and it got kind of down to the wire. And then I reached out, and Troy and I talked about it. Like, should I go to Texas? Should I not go to Texas? Is this insane? Is this ridiculous? And we came to consensus that, okay, I will go to Texas. So I got in the list, and it was wait list only at that point. And filming was going to start on Monday evening. And on Saturday night, I was at Cookbook Club, and I got a text from Troy saying, like, all right, there's an opening. They opened up to people in the wait list. And so we had to figure out Airbnb like Saturday night for a trip that was happening on Monday morning. And it all came together, but I was there for Hebrews in Texas and the Airbnb.
I'll have to look up that DVD. I think Hebrews was one of the last couple years of BSF study. I bet my wife would like that very much.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of I Survived Youth Group in the 90s. We hope you enjoyed it. Once again, we want to thank Troy and Meleah for joining us to talk through their 90s youth group experience and their connection with Five Oaks. Join us again next week for the second part of our conversation with them. Let us know what you thought of this episode or any of our other shows. You can find us on Twitter at the handle @SurvivedYG. You can also email the show at ISurvivedYouthGroup@gmail.com. If you're interested in being on the show, let us know. You didn't necessarily need to attend our youth group, but if you have your own youth group experience from the 90s or the 2000s that you would like to share, we'd love to connect and have you on the show. Please subscribe and share the podcast. If you're so inclined, leave a rating or review. If you enjoy this show, you might also enjoy the other show I do. It's a music podcast called the Album Anniversary Podcast, and over the last couple of years, I've researched and documented the release date of thousands of albums. Throughout the week, I post about them on social media. We've had a couple different formats on the show, but it's an opportunity to sit down and talk and celebrate one of those albums that I've documented on my calendar. Once again, that is the Album Anniversary Podcast. The music at the beginning and the end of this show is the instrumental version of the song Positive Charge by the artist Dread Pirate Roberts. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon. Well, it's funny, Troy. You keep on saying you're old. You're so much older than us. I think you're only like 3 years older than me.
Yeah.
And then the other funny thing you're talking about haircuts, like
talk with your hand there.
I'm totally like in the haircut mold.
Oh, look at that.
I never cut my hair, so
Yeah, you don't.
You need a spiritual haircut.
I do. My wife definitely thinks I need a spiritual haircut. She's had enough of it. But my job doesn't care, so I don't care.